Thank you very much. And hopefully everybody got the handout packet. I'll tell you about these different flyers and stuff, but the PowerPoint's in there, so if you want to take notes as we go through. And I was teasing Annabelle about being at the School of Science to Technology, and guess what they don't have for the PowerPoint? The clicker. So I'm going to just say click, and Annabelle's going to click. And I'm thinking when I came here, I thought there'd be some space age setup or something. I'd be like Bill Gates or something, you know, the latest technology. As Annabelle said, I have a private practice. I also consult for St. Anne's Episcopal School, which is down at Yale and University. I've been there for about 15 years. And I've developed a curriculum for K through 8. I call it Will You Be My Friend? I've got a book proposal out on it right now. This lecture tonight is 90 minutes out of all of that material. And it's a year-long from K to 8. Every year I'm with the kids and teach it. But I've got a book coming out, hopefully if I get the publisher that I'm wanting, for parents on. It's a brain-based book, but it's brain. You'll see a bunch of the drawings tonight and terminology we use that any parent could understand. And most importantly, you could explain it to your kid or your teenager. So it's supposed to be really simple and easy to understand, activities for the kids to do. So the one flyer in here is this little purple guy. That's it's on YouTube. There's 5 video segments. And if I get enough hits, the publisher said they'd pick me up. So go watch it, give me a like or whatever. I haven't liked it myself yet because I can't figure out how to do it. It always tells me I have to log in or something, and I'm like, I don't know how to log in. My son's at college now, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. In the old days, I would have told him. I am also a parent. My wife and I are second marriage for both of us, but I have 2 stepkids, 36 and 26. My son from my marriage is, and I was a single dad for lots of years, so I have that experience. He is 20, he's up at, he's pre-med up at CU, and we just adopted a little 8-year-old girl. So we just couldn't have enough of parenting, I guess. It was either that or retire and play golf. But when you look at my golf game, I probably made the better decision. So I'm learning lots about little girls, and especially how mean they can be to each other, and the drama at the pool this summer of constantly going, girls, just swim. Why are we talking again? Just have fun. And it's the constant drama stuff. Show of hands, how many of you have high schoolers? Nice. Middle school students? Okay, so we're going to kind of do the middle school to high school brain. It does, any of you got young adults, 25? Okay, a little older, out of college, right? So the question would be, does parenting ever end? No. No. My mom likes to say, she's 87, bless her heart, she says, you don't know how your kid's going to turn out till they're about 50. And then you're pretty much like, okay, they're probably cooked now. They're 50. We guarantee that they're going to be okay, right? But with this brain phase we're talking about, it's really some starting in 4th, 5th grade, sort of puberty through age 26, 28. And that's the time period of some massive changes and growth. Your brain does continue to speed up after that period. It speeds up to you're about 35. After 35, guess what? It slows down, and after you've had a teenager or 2, guess what happens? It really slows down, and you get a lot of gray hair. So we'll cover that segment of development and weave in the brain components, and then we'll talk about guidelines at the end. It is I've made it fairly simplistic for people to understand. If any of you are a neuroscientist, we could talk afterwards because you'll have lots of things to say. But it's just kind of a way to look at the brain. This paragraph here in the introductory paragraph I wrote last winter. I did a talk for St. Elizabeth's School, which is an Episcopal school. It's a sister school of St. Anne's. It's down across from University north of Colfax. What's the park? City Park, and not City Park, but is it City Park? So, in that area. And they were unrolling their own middle school, and they asked me to come and speak as a kickoff for their middle school. And I wrote this piece with that school in mind. And I really loved the middle school. My son went to St. Anne's. My daughter, she's at Most Precious Blood on Colorado Boulevard. Delightful middle school. I can't wait for her to go there. Now, when you read the last part, it's a vulnerable time. Each student needs security, structure, and a stimulating academic environment to reach their fullest potential. What other school am I just describing? Right here. This is it. I have a kid I see, a 6th grader. He's at the Byers program, the new Byers program. And he was telling me about the structure and the discipline. And I'm like, oh, I love that. That's what kids need. And their brains really need it. So we'll look at the lack of internal structure. And if you don't have it internally, you need it externally. The whole idea, and I can get a roll on this, the idea of a big public middle school where we dump all these kids in there, and academically we go, oh, this is just a period of social and emotional growth. They're not really able to handle academics rigorously. That was like the stupidest idea on the planet, right? The kids need to be challenged, and there's some really brain basics that would support they need the challenge. So you've got the structure the kids need right here. It fits exactly with their brain. So I'm preaching to the choir. That's why your kids are here. Click. Now, the other point, from a evolutionary psychology perspective. So evolutionary psychologists are always wondering, well, why is their brain that way? What's the function of the child brain? What's the function of the adult brain? In recent years, people started to think about, well, maybe there's some specific reasons why the teen brain is this way. Maybe it really is by evolutionary design that it should be this way, that it serves some specific function. So for years, it's been thought of the teen brain was like those undercooked brownies. You know, when you get the brownie and you take it out early and it's got the fudgy middle, right? And it wasn't fully baked. And from an evolutionary perspective, you're like, well, maybe it's doing what it's actually designed to do. So if you click the next one, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but basically, when you think about their impulsivity, their passion to be with their friends, their passion in general, what jobs did our ancient ancestors during these adolescent years, what did they need to do? Just throw it out there. What did they have to do? Think about our tribal ancestors living in Colorado. What did we have to do? You had to go out and hunt. Guys had to be getting ready to go out and hunt. What else? And collect other berries, collect your food. What else?
Go to war.
Form alliances with your buddies. Females back at camp, did they have to form alliances with each other to do different tasks? So if you're going to be collecting water with her, and you're going to be over doing berries with her, and you each got kids, do we need a couple of the women to take care of the children? Does that take a lot of trust and faith in the other people? Yes? Okay, I'll hold this up. I was hoping for the lapel mic, because I like to talk with my hands. But being the technology school, they didn't have a lapel mic. This is just to the camcorder, so, but I'll hold this up. So we had to fight. We had to build alliances. Your teenagers are going to live in community with each other. Their survival is based on people their own age. You're going to help them get a start up, right? But in 30 or 40 years from now, where are you going to be? Playing golf, maybe? Down in Scottsdale, right? Playing with the grandkids, right? Their future is not dependent upon you. It's dependent upon each other. So when you look at it in terms of those very basic things, this whole teen brain system makes a lot of sense. And it is very intense. So I always have like daily experiences to weave into it, new examples, some joyous, some wonderful. One today, I got a call from a mom. I haven't seen her son in a year and a half. He had some problems freshman year. Overcame those problems. He's a junior, doing great, good grades, working. His mom called me up out of the blue, and she said, I got a text from him today that he wants to switch schools. He has to get out of this school, and he wants to kill himself. Okay, just out of nowhere, right? Now, anybody want to guess what else might have been involved in this scenario today? A girl. So in the Lorax, which I couldn't remember the name of that film, the Lorax film that just came out recently, I was watching with my little 8-year-old, and the boy, the character, I don't know his name, he's talking to the Onceler, and the Onceler says, you know, when a guy does something stupid, it's just because he's a guy. So we'll talk about frontal lobe functioning, and that's true. If the guy does the same thing stupid twice, it's usually because of a girl, right? And sure enough, right there at the Cherry Creek High School, his mom did the right thing. She went over to school immediately, got the dean of students, showed the dean, said, I need you to grab my son. We need to sit down and talk with him. And it had a very successful outcome of her taking care of him and being there for him. And now he can get some help to get through this next bump in the road. And there are a lot of bumps in the road as they go along. Click. So some brain basics real quick. By the age of 12, those of you with younger ones, by the age of 12, your kid has 90 billion brain cells already. As an adult, they'll have 100 billion brain cells, or nerve cells, okay? So all of us have 100 billion in our brains. Click. Now, this is where it gets really incredible. So if you all reached out your arms, or maybe across the row, reach out your arms across to each other. They're each going to be neurons, okay? Now, there's a little gap between the neurons. These little fingers are called dendrites. Their arms are called axioms, okay? So if we wanted to get a message, let's say we're passing a note, the little notes, you remember in middle school, passing notes, right? Who do you like? All that stuff, you know. Who's the cutest boy in the class? So you're going to pass the note to her, hand it off. The note is actually a chemical. One of the chemicals we'll talk about tonight is dopamine, which is really rich up here in the frontal lobe. You're going to pass it over to here, and the message is going to go down the line, okay? Now, that's your simple, basic brain functioning of your elementary student, okay? As you get older, and the difference between the younger brain and the older brain, and especially what's happening in these teen brains, is imagine if, okay, so put out your arms again. Let's say first we just had to go around the circle, around, down around serpentine. Would it take a while to get the message around? It takes forever. But now what if she could grow an arm that went to her, and another arm that went to her, and another one there, and another one way back there? There are neurons, we'll talk about the mirror neurons. Mirror neurons have arms that are 3 feet long in your brain. They wrap all over through your brain. So if she could just make connections to all of you, could the message get really fast? She's got it out there. By the time your kid is 26 or 28, each of those 100 billion neurons will have 7,000 arms reaching out all over the place. Now, I don't know the math on that, but if we did 100 billion times 7,000, that's probably more than the deficit, right? I mean, that's a lot of connections. And that's the potential that we're talking about as they mature. Click. Neuroplasticity, you'll hear that term used a lot. It's basically the ability of the brain to rewire itself to make new connections, okay? Now, that's gotten a lot of focus in recent years. They're finding that with stroke patients, with people with brain damage, neck damage, paralysis, the brain has a lot more ability to adapt than we thought it did. So it can rewire stuff in ways that it never had it before and can rewire it. During these adolescent years, this thing is just going to work nonstop. It is a lot easier to rewire it now than later, okay? So basic idea, remember the DIA baggage system when they built it? They could never get it to work. So apparently something at the core early on wasn't working right. The Obamacare computer system sounds like it's pretty messed up, right? Like they're having a tough time fixing that puppy. So the brain can rewire itself later in life, but it's much better to do it now early on and get that foundation, get those axioms growing. Click. Basic concept of the brain is pruning. The brain prunes back. So if you had all those brain cells and all those axioms, and some of them you weren't using some of them, it's just extra exits off the highway for the brain, and it becomes more inefficient. So the brain will trim them out, okay? So the concept is use it or lose it. So if you're not pushing your adolescent in all sorts of arts and academics and athletics, if you're not pushing them, the brain just lets it go, gets rid of it. So those brains need to be pushed in middle school and high school. Now, one other process I want to talk about real quickly, there's the arms we were talking about. As you get into age 12, puberty starts 13, the first segment of the brain, the language centers, start to form what's called myelin sheathing. Myelin sheathing is basically a coating along the arm. What it does is allow the electrical activity to speed up in the brain, okay? So it speeds things up really fast. When that happens, it's harder for those neurons to grow extra arms, okay? So in foreign languages, we know now that if you want to learn a foreign language, when is the easiest time of life to learn it? When you're like 4 or 5, right? Much easier to learn. After about age 12 or 14, it really gets more difficult because the language center myelin sheathing is already taking place. Now we'll talk about the president up here, the frontal lobe. That doesn't happen until, starts a little bit later, doesn't get finished here about 26, 28. But the myelin sheathing is speeding up the brain. So if we click, and you can do these next series rather fast. So do like, you'll see it, just keep going. What can it do for you? Click. That's the speed of the child's brain, which is, click, 2 miles an hour. So your elementary kid, their brain's going at 2 miles an hour. After myelination takes place, click it twice, 200 miles an hour. So your brain is firing at 200 miles an hour. And you've got 7,000 alarms and 100 billion brain cells. Incredibly complex. That's what that teen brain is getting towards. Make sense? So the myelination really helps us, it speeds us up, but it hinders new learning because it's harder to grow those axons. That's why the kids need to be pushed middle school, high school, on into college. Click. Okay, so now we're going to talk about 3 basic brain areas that really, if you put them together, you can kind of get a good snapshot of who your kid is, how they're going to behave, particularly in the social arenas and the emotional arenas, and how those areas affect academics. So the first area is what I like to call the president. It's this frontal lobe up here. The term everybody's talking about nowadays is executive functioning. Have you heard of it? Okay, the executive functioning skills, all right? So the executive function skills are over here. I'm going to go through those in a second. But the easiest way to, the first guy that scientists started thinking about is this part of the brain, like what does it do for us? Have any of you heard of Phineas Gage? He was this railroad worker in the 1870s. He was the foreman of the railroad crew because he could pay attention, he was organized, he had good self-control, he didn't gamble, he didn't drink, he didn't fight. He was a gentleman, so they made him foreman. There was a bizarre accident where this tamping iron got shot through his head, went behind his eye, came out the top of his head, and he survived it. The guy lived, but completely lost his frontal lobe. 3 months later, when he went back to work, guess what they noticed about him? He's disorganized. He's spacey, can't pay attention, gets distractible, is kind of moody, gets irritated, starts playing cards, can't stop gambling, starts drinking a lot, starts getting into fights. And the medical journal said, started using, nowadays we'd say, inappropriate language, okay? Now, does that sort of sound like the average teenager, right? I had to go, Mom, I was seeing this kid the other day. He's like 8th grade, big strapping kid, basketball player. And he got home and he's like, Mom, where's my basketball shoes? And she's like, I don't know, where'd you put them? Well, I brought them home. They were in the minivan and now they're not there. You must have moved them. And Mom's like, no, I didn't, right? He's all upset. Next day he goes back to school. Guess where the shoes are? On top of his locker. So what he had done, he took them out, put them on top of the locker, went to get the rest of his books. Then probably some buddy said, come on, lacrosse is starting. Grabbed his backpack and off he went. Where's the shoes? Top of the locker. Now in his mind, it's his mother's fault. How many of you have heard, you moms out there, how many of you heard it's your fault, right? You are the one that's causing all those problems, right? So taking responsibility for oneself, that takes a lot of years. So that's a long way off, okay? But Phineas was the first guy that got scientists thinking about, wow, this part of the brain is really incredible. Now, there's a great study done in the late 50s. They're still studying these subjects. They're now my age. They studied them when they were in preschool. So this is the early 60s, and they did the marshmallow test. Real simply, the psychologist took the kids in one at a time, the preschoolers in, and offered them a marshmallow and said, you can eat the marshmallow, or if you can wait 10 minutes, I'll leave the room. If you can wait 10 minutes, when I come back, if you don't eat it, I'll give you 4 more. Okay? Now, what do you think some of the kids did? Ate it immediately. The lady didn't get to finishing discussing it and describing it, and they ate it. Okay? Then that was about 33% of the kids ate it right away. Another 33% of the kids tried to wait. And in the videotapes, which I've seen some of them, those are the best. Because they're sitting there staring at that marshmallow, right? And they're trying to sit on their hands, and they poke it, and they lick it, and put it back, right? And on average, there's one kid who takes a chunk out, eats it, and then reformulates the marshmallow. And I'm like, Wall Street for that guy. He's set, man. He's got it done. And on average, after 7 minutes, guess what? They ate it. They couldn't stop. Now, do teenagers tend to be pretty obsessive sometimes? Right? They really get stuck on things. The group that tried to wait that couldn't, their problem was they were obsessed with the marshmallow. Now, 33% of the kids didn't touch it. And on those films of those kids are looking out the window. The girls are looking at their dress, right? They're not looking at the marshmallow. 10 minutes later, they got the 4 marshmallows. They followed them at age 20, 30, 40. They're in their 50s now. And they've looked at all sorts of things, education, jobs, family, happiness. Now they're looking at physical health, diabetes, obesity, all sorts of variables. What do you think they found about the three groups? The kids who could wait, what do you think happened to them? They're doing great. They're doing fabulous. The middle kids, so-so. The marshmallow eaters are really struggling. They had a hard time, right? And that's that presidential functioning that those kids are missing out on. So they struggle with paying attention, getting distracted easily, organization, impulse, and emotional control, right? So when your emotions, we'll talk about your emotions next, when your emotions come up from down in this region of your brain, down here by your brain stem, when they come up, guess what that president's supposed to say? Stop, right? Do you remember when your kid was little and the kickball would go across the street? They start running for the kickball. What are you yelling? Stop. Now hopefully that kid is yelling that to themselves, stop, look both ways, right? The marshmallow eaters, they don't stop. They just blow right through it. If you can get your president to stop your emotions and your impulses, then your brain will kick it down another part, a little bit lower than the frontal lobe on the right side, which is where you can think about your feelings. You can think things like, do I really need to be that upset? You know, my friend just blew me off, but maybe she was interested in that boy. Maybe she was trying to attract that boy. Or, you know, it's not that big a big deal that I get invited to the party. There's always going to be more parties. I don't really need to be that upset about it, okay? You can actually reason with your feelings. But if you don't stop it, you can't get to that. So it's part of that stop mechanism. Movement control, the movement center in your brain is right in the middle of your frontal lobe. Any of you fidgeters? And can you all hear me now? Is this working? Okay. Who fidgets? Any fidgeters? I am. I love pens. I'm always holding a pen. I can just twirl a pen. Paper clips are fabulous too. Some people just need to move and fidget. Now, a lot of the younger children might have the hyperactivity piece. That's from this part of the brain right here. My father could not sit still till the day he died. You would have had to duct tape my dad to get him to sit still. He was always moving. He just could not sit still. That's in there. Time management is in there. Now, not just the ability to read a clock, but to perceive how long something would take, right? Your little 4-year-old, their concept of time, they could do about 20 minutes. So when my son was little, we'd be driving in the mountains and he'd say, Dad, how long before we get there? And I'd say, well, that's about 2 of your VeggieTales videos. And he would go, okay. And he could figure that out about how long 2 VeggieTale videos would take, okay? Your high school kids, do they need to have a much smaller framework of time? Yes, right? So when they got that load of homework, right? The first thing they're supposed to do when they get home, kind of organize it and figure out how long everything will take, right? The marshmallow waiters, they can do that. They can go, oh, that's about 30 minutes, and I got 20 minutes on that one. I got an hour and a half on that big test coming up. So I think I'll have about 15 minutes of free time. I'll do some texting, okay? The kids that eat the marshmallows right away, what do they think? Oh, I got to get to texting immediately. I'll get that done in 20 minutes. All of it. I can have it all done, right? You come in at 9, 10 o'clock. Are you done with your homework yet? No, haven't started, right? And your hair just got grayer, right? They don't manage time. Now, on a safety level, for beginning drivers, how many of your kids got a driving certificate, you know, or their license or their permit, okay? When they're learning to drive, what's the hardest thing to learn? The most difficult thing driving and the most dangerous? Left turn, okay? When you make a left turn, what do you have to do? Your brain has to calculate. That car's coming at me, okay? How long before that car's there and it gets to here? How long would it take my car to go from here to there, okay? If you're off by a half second or a second, what happens? You know, if you're lucky, you hear the horn. If you're not, your kid just got T-boned, right? That's a really dangerous move. Their brains are still developing that capacity. So while this president is growing, I'll tell you about that in a second, their perception of time drops. Working memory is part of that. That's the ability when you say to them, hey, don't forget to do this, this, and this. And they're like, yeah, Mom, I got it. They go walking upstairs. Oh, wow. A Sports Illustrated from 3 years ago. That's our old, that's Tebow. I got to look at that, right? And what happened to those 3 things? Gone, absolutely gone. It's the Etch-a-Sketch memory, okay? That's your average adolescent. Gating is the ability to filter out distractions, sounds. So right now, there's probably a sound coming from over there. That thing's pretty quiet. You know, maybe down the hallway you hear doors or whatever. When you hear stuff, she's coughing. Sorry to embarrass you, but what your president's supposed to say, filter that out. I don't need to pay attention to that. I need to focus on the speaker, okay? That's gating. Now, your little 3 or 4-year-old doesn't have much of a president, okay? Your 2-year-old, 3-year-old, you're the president. You're the brakes for that child. When their emotions come out because they didn't get the cookie at the Safeway, what are you saying to them? Stop it right now, or you'll have a consequence. You'll be in timeout, okay? And they stop, hopefully, right? You're the president, okay? Now, as they get, the little girls first, so girls are about 1.5 years ahead of boys in most areas of brain development, about 1.5 years to 2 years ahead. Your little 4-year-old girls, 5-year-old girls, their little presidents are coming online, okay? When I go teach in kindergarten, how do most of the girls look in the kindergarten classroom? They're so cute. Their hair's done. They've just had lunch and their outfits still look great. They're sitting crisscross applesauce, spoons in the bowl, right? And when they want to talk, what do? They raise their hand, right? What are most of the boys doing? Spinning around. They're in the back. They always go for the back, right? Touching the blocks on the shelves. They've got lunch all over them. Their hair's sticking up. When they want to talk, half the time it's not on the topic, and they just blurt it out, right? And there's always some kid that like wants to touch my shoes or something, and I'm like, don't touch my shoes, man. Come on, sit still, right? So finally, the little boys come online. As we're getting into 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade, if you took a test of executive functioning, average female is about the 80th percentile. Average male is about the 50th, okay? So boys, and there's genetic reasons for it, our frontal lobes don't work as well as women, okay? Now, if you think from a survival perspective, if we were all up in the mountains living out in the woods right now, and all of you were glued to paying attention to me, okay, as I'm talking, what could happen to us? Something sneaks up, right? And all of a sudden, Bob over here is gone. We don't even notice, right? Afterwards, we're like, where's Bob? He was here a minute ago, right? Well, the bear just drug him off. Now, if Bob's distractible and he hears a noise, he doesn't gate the noise out. He hears some noise or stick crack. What's Bob going to do? Yeah, pick up his spear and throw it, right? Now, if he hit a bear, he's the hero. He just saved us. If he hit his friend who was going out to pee, then we're like, you did it again, man. You got to stop killing others. That's too impulsive, right? So we do need, for long-term survival, we need people that are impulsive, right? That they're quick decision makers. They can take risks. They can charge up the hill, okay? So boys are about 50th percentile. That's your 3rd or 4th grader. You're hoping they can do their little book reports. They can sit still. You remember seat time when your kids were little? They'd talk about seat time in the classroom. It's 20 or 30 minutes, right? How long is seat time now in the middle school? Here. I don't know, I'm asking. 60 minutes, 70, right? How about the high school? Same, a little longer, right? You're supposed to be able to sit still, pay attention, listen to the teacher, get engaged, stay focused, not get distracted, do all those things. The problem, though, is as they start puberty, they all sort of slide down this scale. That frontal lobe is rapidly expanding. So it's growing and growing and growing. It's growing all these new arms. While it's growing, it doesn't work so well. For you guys in the audience, do you remember the HO cars? The little Hot Wheels cars? Remember that? And the orange tracks? You can make the orange track, you make a loop-de-loop or something, right? So your little kid's track, their frontal lobe, is sort of like the starter model. You know, the cars are on there, it's got one loop and a couple turns. Now you've hit puberty and dad comes home and he says, son, look at all these extra pieces of track I have, man, and throws it in the middle, okay? Now the kid's gonna start rebuilding it. Eventually, what's he gonna have? The coolest HO track on the planet. It's gonna have like 3 loops and stuff, okay? He's gonna have it going over the bookcase. But between the old set and the new one, when it's done, is it gonna work very well? It doesn't work so well. And that's that adolescent prefrontal lobe. It's expanding so fast, it just goes offline for a while. The other reason is that, remember the chemical we were talking about, the little note we were passing? Okay, she was passing the note. Those notes are little chemicals in our brain. There's 300 different kinds of chemicals in our brain. 4 main ones, the 2 biggest ones in terms of social and emotional functioning for this is dopamine. There's another one, norepinephrine, that plays a role with this, but dopamine's your big one. The amount of dopamine, the actual number of chemicals, the notes, drops in about half, okay? So they have a harder time getting the message across. Can your teenagers be spacey sometimes? Now, if they get excited enough, guess what happens to your dopamine levels? They go up, okay? Your brain produces more. But you got to have a charge, okay? The first memory I have of this school, so it's 10 years ago, I think you told me? It's been around. It was in the Post. They had it on the news. They did some morning assembly with some science experiment. Like, do you do that every morning or something? That's what I remember. They said, you know, they start with an experiment at assembly. And it's these students doing this, I don't know, involve fire or something. And what are all the kids going? Whoa, right? I'm watching at home going, now that's a cool school, right? Those kids are engaged. So when you get turned on by something, your dopamine levels juice. They go up. If you're kind of bored and it's not very stimulating, those dopamine levels stay down. If the dopamine levels are too low, you can't do the executive functions, okay? Now, the interesting part about a dopamine, it's also involved in our pleasure circuit. If they go really high, your brain says, I like that, I want to do it again, okay? So if you're in a stimulating, do you remember, did any of you have a stimulating teacher in high school that you thought was fabulous, right? When you left your class, what were you thinking about? It was great, next class. Can't wait for the next class, see what this guy has to say. This is really cool. Mine was junior in high school. I took a Civil War class. It was the first time, Dr. Prowler was his name. It was the first time he didn't care how I spelled, my grammar, anything. He just wanted to know my thoughts about what caused the Civil War. Loved the guy. I was turned on by that class. I got a dopamine juice out of it. Now, there's other things that will juice your dopamine system. If you saw the Denver Post this morning, did you see the front page headline? What's the big problem? The pot. All the kids, now it's in the middle schools, right? Pot increases your dopamine level 16 times, okay? Now at that level, here's the interesting part. So we're talking about the sweet spot. We want the sweet spot where you can do all these things. If your dopamine levels are too low, you can't do this stuff. So the teen brain is already low. If you have a kid with ADHD, so if you've got ADHD, all ADHD is, if you test on the bottom 8 or 10th percentile, you got ADD, okay? Your executive functioning skills, your frontal lobe is not working as well as it should. So those kids in adolescence, it's even more turbocharged, okay? And very much, there's a Hungarian proverb that goes, a child at 3 or 4 is how they'll be at 13 and 14. And it's pretty much true, because it's the same frontal lobe. So it drops down in functioning. Now, if the dopamine levels get too high, the only thing that's left that works is attention. And it's called hyperfocus. Your brain goes into hyperfocus. And it is just like, whoa. So think about it. I'm not going to ask any of you that, did you smoke pot or not? I'm not going to ask that. But think about 4 guys sitting in the dorm room up at CU. They're going, wow, man. You know, in New Jersey, they have Jay's potato chips. Here in Colorado, they have the Lay's potato chips. What happened to the J, man? I don't know. Who switched it? It's a conspiracy, right? And they talk about the same thing for hours, okay? When it wears off, how do they act? It's the first sign your kid's doing too much pot. They're grumpy. They're irritable. When the dopamine levels plummet, agitation follows, right? So they're irritable and grumpy. Now the dopamine levels are too low. They can't control any of those emotions. Guess what else pumps up your dopamine levels 16 times? Video games, action video games. Kids' perception on a video game, if they start playing video games, and if you ever played one, one time I had a certified gaming addiction for about 3 weeks. It was the Risk, you know Risk, the board game Risk? Mm-hmm. It says you conquer the world, and we played it all the time in college, board game. Like, my buddy gave it to me on the computer, and this is the, you know, the big computer, not the laptop or anything. I played that every night, and all of a sudden, I'd look at the clock, and it's like 2 in the morning. I'm like, I thought it was about 10, right? Your perception of time is just gone. So if you're doing the gaming, when you say to your kid, get off that thing, you've been on there for an hour, what do they say? Well, it just got on, right? You know, they have no perception of time. It's absolutely gone. That's when it gets too high, right? Then you have this drop. So you're looking for sort of the sweet spot. Now, as your kids get older, get into adulthood, then they're going to slide back up here. And they generally are going to end up where they were before adolescence started. So they're going to be somewhere approximately close to where they were, okay? So for you ladies out there, when women watch TV show, what do? They just watch it. When a guy watches a TV show, what's he doing? Click, click. I'm not talking to you. Click, click, click. You know, you're watching 6 shows at once, okay? Now, if I gave you a test on what you watched, you know, the show you were supposed to be watching, who's going to do better on the test? Women. They're always paying attention, right? They're watching the full video. For guys, it's going to be a little more skewed because you're switching around from one thing to the next. But eventually, that's where you're going to come out, okay? So you really got to think about, well, where is your kid? Where were they when they were little? They're going to all slide down. They're going to get back up again, okay? The girls at about 26, this is going to stop. Boys, it's about 28. Car rental companies, 28 for boys. Yeah, I know. It's brain damaging, isn't it? I will give you a vision of hope. So it goes in phases, okay? It's not just all or nothing. It's not like day one happens in 6th grade and they're all zombies, okay? It's different for different kids. And there is some peaks of maturity. For girls, you'll find girls about the end of 8th grade, they're really starting to come back, right? They look, by about March every year in 8th grade, I look at the 8th grade girls, they look ready for high school, right? They're done with middle school. They're ready to move on. They're more thoughtful. They're thinking about their futures. Michael Thompson, who's a well-known author, his buddy, he said, you know, by the end of 8th grade, girls have said every mean possible thing they can think of to each other. So they just call a truce because they can't think of what else to say to each other. So they just decide to stop fighting, okay? Actually, it's their presidents have really started to mature. For your parents of boys, if you got older ones, when would you guess? You'll see a jump. It's about the end of sophomore year. So usually around end of 10th grade, all of a sudden the guy starts to make the connection between my personal behavior and discipline and where I'm going to college, right? You'll see that coaches will see the same thing, where guys all of a sudden are like, I got to work out. You know, I got to stick with my regime. I want to be on the varsity team in the next 2 years. I want to do all these great things, and I've got to get disciplined, okay? But your freshman guys are a lot like junior high guys. There's no difference between your 9th graders and your 7th grade guys. And they're not very attractive. They really are not attractive. I remember one time this girl said to me, oh, that 9th grade boy, he's so insightful. And I'm like, 9th grade boy insightful. That's an oxymoron. That's really not possible. They're just really cretins still. But there's some hope. But it does take till about 28 before it's done. Now the car rental companies have known this for a long time. What age do you have to be to rent a car? 25 to have it for yourself. I think when 21 you can drive it with somebody else. You got to be 25. If you give a car to some 19, 22, 23-year-old guy and he gets the Corvette, what's he going to do with it? First, he's going to be racing it everywhere. And then if he's on Vegas, he's going to be like, I wonder if I could go into the desert with this, right? Maybe I can climb up some mountains in the Corvette. They're going to trash the daylights out of the thing. They just don't have the self-control and the decision-making yet. But there is hope. So it does take longer. By around 26, 28, things are really cranking. Then, and the most debated thing in neuroscience right now is this whole concept of multitasking and whether or not you can actually do it. They do feel, the latest thing I read is they think about 5% of the population can actually multitask. And it's usually people like surgeons, people are in high-intensity jobs where they just have to be doing all these different things at once. Most of us really don't. We just switch from one thing to the next. But if we are capable of doing it, it's because that brain's matured. It's got those 7,000 connections on each neuron. It's got the myelination going. It's making those connections and running things at all at the same time, simultaneous. What's that? Well, you do it all the time. Dads do too. But moms are always multitasking, right? You've got so many different things in your head. And the question is, how well can you think about them simultaneously versus just switching from one screen to the next, right? So when you're switching on your Windows program or whatever, you can close out that window, get the next window. They're always running, though. Do you ever give up being a mom or thinking about the kids? No, doesn't happen. So one could make the case. Now, again, girls are already down on this end, okay? So they probably have a higher, I've never seen research on that, but maybe a better capacity to do that than guys because they're already down on this end. All right, I'm going to switch to the next one before I do any quick questions about that or anything. Okay, does it make sense? So that's brain system 1, executive functioning. Click. Oh, yes.
One last question to circulate back to marijuana.
Yeah.
Does it have a permanent effect on executive functioning?
Yeah, that's in the developing brain, yes. Interesting enough, so what it does is it prevents the axioms from growing. The biggest jump in the brain development is the frontal lobe. So with that teenage brain compared to the younger kids, so when you go from 90 billion to 100 billion cells, most of it's in the frontal lobe. It's the last part of our brains to develop in the children. It's the last part of the brains to develop in our species. Okay, it really separates our species from others, is this incredible president that we have. As it's growing, those axioms, THC stunts the development of new axioms. So you really can't learn stuff. Not only is it affecting your long-term attention abilities, but it impacts learning. You don't learn new things as well because it's stunning that. Now, interestingly enough, the same chemical, if you were going to pass a law for sensible marijuana use, guess what the age limit would be, or the age you'd have to be? It's about 65, about 60 or 65. So what they found is that THC prevents myelination from happening and the growth of new axioms, but it reinforces myelination as you age. It actually helps preserve it. So if anybody was going to get stoned, it should be grandma. Like, she should be going out for a doob out back, and you tell the teenager to stay away from grandma. She's having her quiet time right now. She's preserving her brain, and that's what she's doing. But yeah, so it does have those effects. Oh, this slide, quick. I just added this in. I got it from a buddy of mine. If you look at the blue and purples areas, that's increased activation in the brain. And if you look at that front part, see how there's the 5-year-old. They don't have much of a president yet. Now we're moving along, 10, 11, here we are. And 20 plus years, it's really cranking up, okay? It's really growing and developing. It's moving along. Okay, next. Second area of the brain, the furnace of emotions, your limbic system. That's where emotions come from. It's down here in the brainstem. So your brainstem is up here in the top of your neck. The limbic system wraps around it. And it's what produces our emotions, okay? So it's a chemical factor. It's producing all these little notes. And they tell us to feel happy or sad or embarrassed. Do teenagers get embarrassed easily? I heard somebody, Mel Levine, who's passed away now, pretty controversial guy. Have any of you read his stuff? But George Bush based a lot of his No Child Left Behind on Mel Levine's work. And he said, I heard him say once, adolescence is a 24/7 job of avoiding embarrassment, okay? You want to be connected to your friends. You've got to fit in, right? And you're embarrassed, you know, if something happens. You're just mortified if things aren't working out with your friend. When your adolescent says to you, especially the girls, but I have to have my friend, how can you ground me? They really feel it, right? It is Romeo and Juliet going on in their emotional system, okay? Those furnaces are turned on high, right? They are cranked up. If you measured the chemical output of the elementary kid and the adult versus the teenager with the same experience, teenagers have twice the emotional output. So their emotions are doubled compared to what yours are, okay? So when you as the dad go, it's no big deal, get over it. You're like, what's the big problem, right? You don't get it. To the girl, it's a huge problem. It's big, right? Those systems really crank up. Now, all of your kids have sort of a temperament, so you should sort of understand what's your kid's natural temperament. So I made up a riddle for 4th graders that I teach at St. Anne's. And we use the Winnie the Pooh characters. And the temperament has to do with how well can your kid hold on to just contentment, or happiness or contentment. I actually like contentment a little better than happiness. But how long can they sort of be like Winnie the Pooh? So when life happens, can they get over it quick? Can they be resilient and not get all down? So if the characters in Winnie the Pooh were going through the walk in the woods, Pooh, the kids told me years ago, we developed a scale, 1 to 10, how kind of happy they are to begin with. Well, Pooh's pretty happy, right? So Pooh's like an 8. He starts out on the walk, and he trips over a rock. What does Pooh say? He's laying there, he's got a little scuffed up. What does he say? Oh, bother. But there might be honey in one of the trees. And he pops up, he brushes himself off, and he goes whistling along, looking around for honey, okay? How many of you have kids like Pooh that get over stuff quick? Right? Now again, they're teenagers, so it's going to take them longer. Some of you have the Poohs, right? How many of you are sort of Pooh? Any of you Pooh-like? I'm pretty much Pooh. I was born that way. And most of us are just born a certain way, right? Piglet. Piglet's fairly happy. Piglet goes on the walk. He trips over the rock. Piglet says, I got to go home. There's going to be more rocks. I'll get really hurt. I better scurry home. And he goes back home, and he's totally anxious. He has an anxiety disorder. And finally, he's in his home for a while. Maybe he has a little tea, and he calms down. Okay? So he has that reaction. See the line? On the Pooh, the line bounces back up. With Piglet, it stays there. He can't even go on the walk, and it finally kind of comes back up. Now, could you trigger Pooh again easily back into anxiety? You betcha. How many of you got anxious kids that get pretty worried about stuff? Okay. I saw a little girl the other day, little third grade girl, and her math anxiety, and she's just thinking about it all the time. And she's playing every possible scenario in her head, right? And when the teacher might call on her and what she's going to do if the teacher calls on her. And I said, honey, I'm going to talk to your teacher. I'm going to make sure she tells you when she gets a problem, she'll tell you which problem she's going to call on you so you don't have to worry. And she's like, oh, thank you. She was just terrified of being called on, okay? And they get triggered pretty easily. If you have a Piglet, don't talk to him at night, late, okay? Because when you fall asleep, the first part of your brain to turn off is your president. Remember the function of that president is to say stop to the emotions? If your president's asleep, there's nothing telling them to stop. So little kids, every little kid at nighttime, do their fears come out at night? They're starting to fall asleep, the president shuts off. I heard a noise, right? Did you check the locks? I heard about that burglar that kidnapped that girl, right? And it's all coming out. You got your teenager who's got a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress. They need to talk about it, probably not right before bed, right? And they don't need to talk about it for a long time. You need to kind of put a time limit on it. Otherwise, it's just going to get worse. Now, Rabbit's not the happiest fellow. He's kind of OCD. He likes his garden perfect and his little rabbit hole perfect, right? And if anybody comes around, if Tigger comes around, he's all flummoxed, okay? Rabbit goes for the walk. He trips over the rock. He says, stupid rock. I hate rocks. I don't want to be friends with any rocks. And the rest of the walk, he goes along mad. There's another rock. I don't want to be his friend either, right? Throwing rocks, all pissed off before he gets back home, okay? The angry kid, right, who gets reactive. Teenage males, I'll show you a slide in a minute. Teenage guys perceive a lot of things in a very angry way. They perceive anger in others, and they respond with anger. The girls will too. How many of your teenagers have said to you, stop yelling at me? And you're like, I wasn't yelling. You're doing it again. And you're like, well, but no, I talk like this all the time. No, you only talk like that to me. Like, whoa, okay. They really perceive things and have more of that anger thing going. They got the rabbit going more. Now, some kids had it when they were little too. Okay, I had a little fourth grade boy once who said, I'm kind of a rabbit at football. And all the other boys were like, yes, he is. He gets all mad and he's yelling and fighting every game. Eeyore, he's not real happy. His melancholia, dysthymia is what you call it nowadays. And Eeyore goes along, he trips over the rock, and Eeyore says, even the rocks don't want to be my friend. And he walks along the rest of the time. Every time he sees a rock, he says, there's another rock that doesn't want to be my friend. Right? He's full of woe. He gets into that sad thing, that depression. Okay? Now, if you turbocharge emotions in kids, and it's doubled in adolescents, are there a fair number of adolescents that get depressed? Yeah, and have depression. That's not an uncommon thing. I tell 8th graders, one of my last talks of the year, we talk about some of the intense stuff, the life and death stuff, and I say, you know, most of you in this room will have an experience in high school or college where you're going to feel like or think about maybe you want to not be on this planet. So that is not an uncommon, and I'm not going to ask you, but if I asked all of you, did you ever feel that yourself? Do you remember that feeling that maybe you wanted to die? Most of you would probably say yes. It's not uncommon for teenagers to get to that point, okay? How many of you have high-performing kids? I'm assuming if they're going here, they're pretty high performers, right? They're pretty driven kids. They're looking for the college, right? Buddy of mine, daughter, 24 years old, final year of vet school, straight A's. She told her friends she wanted to kill herself. She had a plan, too. She couldn't handle the stress. She just collapsed. She had anxiety. She already had anxiety. She'd had that her whole life, kind of the obsessive thing. But all that stress, that kid imploded, right? Where she's feeling suicidal. Okay, so it's not uncommon for your teens to go through periods where they're feeling pretty down. They're feeling like Eeyore. Okay, now Tigger, he falls over the rock. He says, "That was the greatest thing I've ever done. I want to do it again." And he keeps falling over the rock. He goes home bloody and bruised, and he says, "That's the best walk I've ever been on in my life." I had a little 4th grade boy once jump up in the top of his chair and he said, "I'm a Tigger." And I'm like, yeah, but the fact that you're standing in your chair right now, that would indicate you are. You really are the Tigger that goes with the gusto. So you want to understand your kid's basic temperament. Then multiply it by 2. okay? So if your kid has had struggles earlier on with anxiety, the stress management, maybe some depression or the anger, you figure it's going to be more, and you really need to be on top of that, okay? So they may need to access some counseling services during this period of their life. It's going to be tougher on them. If you got the Pooh, there are teenagers that can kind of slide through like Pooh, right? They're a little less Pooh-like, but they kind of slide through. They go through the ups and downs, right? Click. Okay, back to this. Stop, how's your defense? We'll do a basketball analogy quick. I have till 8, right? Yeah, okay. So think basketball. We got the emotions down here, president's up here. The emotions are going to be the offense. They're on a fast break. The preschoolers, that 3 and 4-year-old, they're very turbocharged emotionally. They have a lot of emotions, okay? So when they don't get the cookie at the Safeway, their emotions are just charging down the court. You got 4 fast players on a fast break, okay? They're coming down the court. And there's like one short guy named Bob trying to stop them, okay? They don't have the president yet, so they don't have the defense. Now, with blessing of latency-age children, their emotions drop in half. So they tamper, their emotions tend to get dampened, okay, for most of the kids. So now it's 2 players coming down the court with the ball, and they've got 2 big guys back there to stop them. So do they have a good chance of stopping the fast break? They can at least slow it down some, right? With good coaching, they're going to stop that fast break. So are you hoping 2nd, 3rd, and 4th graders don't fuss as much? They can handle life better. Now with the teen brain, that president's not working as well. So now we're down to 1 defenseman. And guess how many forwards are coming down the court? Offense guys, 4. And they're fast and they're big. And you got 4-on-1 again. Who's going to score? Romeo and Juliet. Think about it. Passion unleashed. What's the only thing Romeo had to do to change the end of that story? Remember? She fakes her death. What did he have to do? If he had waited, if he had got his cell phone out, called his buddy Bob and said, Bob, bring a Pepsi over. I need to talk to you, man. I think Juliet's dead. I'm pretty bummed. She would have woken up, right? But when that emotion and those 4 players come down the court and you don't have the defense, what's Romeo do? Kills himself. Now Juliet kills herself. I know it's a great romantic classic, but if you read that in the Post tomorrow, 2 dead teenagers, how would you feel? You'd be like, Jesus, how did they do that? Well, they do it because those emotions are just cranked up, and the defense isn't there to stop it, right? Now, you put guys in a group together. So we'll talk about group think. They're all in the locker room. Somebody says, oh yeah, that kid is such a wussy or whatever, okay? And you want to impress your buddies, what do? Oh yeah, I could take that kid. Let's duct tape his buns together or something, right? Pretty soon, guess what they're doing? They're duct taping that kid's buns. Did you ever see that movie, Breakfast Club? That's what that one wrestler kid does. And what's so cool about it when they're talking with the friends, he says, I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to do it to him, but you know, my dad, and I just did it. He didn't really want to do it. He had empathy, right? Empathy can fly out the window in a heartbeat, okay? Now, if you've been following the Miami Dolphins and that, I can't say that guy's name, Incognito, or whatever, apparently there's not a whole lot of empathy in that locker room either, right? And when guys get together, they have found in the research just recently that for your 13 to 15-year-old boys, the kids that had good empathy before they went into puberty, their empathy levels dropped for a couple years. And they think it's because of the testosterone, which we're going to talk about, the intense testosterone drive and this intense feeling and anger that caused their empathy to drop. It did recover, fortunately, so it went back up. Now, if you take that drop and you put it in a locker room with 6 other guys, do they do really mean, stupid stuff? Yeah, and it's not real fun. You get that whole group bullying thing. Do we need to have a structured school for that? Yeah, right? You need to have structure, rigid deportment in your school. That's how you stop that stuff. So that's the defense system. Now, again, by the time they're older, as you get older, your emotional system starts to dampen down again. The young adults are still pretty emotional. As you get into your 40s, you know, you're going to go to bed anyway. You know, or you're in the lazy boy. Why are you going to get so upset? And there's always tomorrow. You know, there's always tomorrow. I can deal with that. So your emotions dampen, and hopefully you have more wisdom. You have more of a president. So you're hoping by the time you're 60, you're one of those elders in the community that doesn't react too emotionally and has lots of wisdom, lots of defense to explain it to the children, right? How many of you had grandparents like that gave you wisdom? They didn't get so ratcheted up about stuff, and they could actually think about stuff. And now the equation's changed. They barely have any forwards coming down the court. There's one guy coming down the court with the ball, and they got 4 guys back. Can they stop that guy? Yeah, pretty much. You don't read too much in the paper. I have seen a few stories lately. But in general, what age group are you reading about getting into drunken brawls and road rage and killing each other? It's generally statistically the younger people, right? Not so much for the older ones. Does that happen? Yeah, some people still do that, but it's a lot less. Okay, I want to do hormones in the teen brain. Click. We're going to rock and roll. We'll do the females first. My graduate student, Liz, she's a doctorate student at Children's Hospital now, did this for me. First 2 weeks of the cycle, lots tied in the cycle. Again, this is fairly simplistic. There's lots of other hormones involved, but the big one for the girls is related to that cycle. First 2 weeks of the cycle, estrogen shoots up, okay? Girls during the first 2 weeks are more focused. They pay attention better. Their performance goes up. Academic and sports performance goes up, okay? They are razor sharp. They're social. They're reading the nonverbal stuff around them. They're just social butterflies. They're super women, okay? After ovulation, estrogen levels drop. The progesterone levels go up. What Liz came up with was the idea of it's sort of like a weed killer, right? Getting sprayed on. Focus decreases. We're not paying attention as well. And our stress sensitivity starts to go up. Then during the 4th week, everything sort of collapses, right? And then it's a new day. Then we start over again, right? Now, my wife came up with this 2-day rules when she works with teenage girls. She's on the board for Smart Girl. Have any of you heard of it? I just wrote the introduction for the new curriculum. They have a curriculum for girls and boys now. We have a program for boys. And it's a middle school boys and girls empowerment program, specifically to help them be more resilient, kind of look at things, not get so down on themselves, how to realize that this phase of their life is going to end. They don't, they can get through this stuff, right? But she likes to tell the girls, if you're in the last 2 weeks of your cycle and you got to make a big decision, like, switching a class or breaking up with your boyfriend, give it at least 2 days. Don't make the decision right away. It's probably going to be a bad one. Now, I came up with my own 2-week rule for dads, which is if you have to have a talk with your teen daughter about something, which 2 weeks should you do it during? If you do it during the second 2 weeks, you're a fool. You're an idiot. And lots of bad stuff's coming your way. You do it in the first 2 weeks, she might be real receptive and just be, okay, Daddy, thank you, I really appreciate how you care about me. The second 2 weeks, you're getting a different response, okay? And I got to tell you, our little girl that we adopted, she is just an amazing child. But she does struggle with this stuff here. Some early experiences in her life have really made the presidential functioning difficult. And I could see, I'm fantasizing 10 years from now, during that first 2 weeks, she'll be jumping on the back of some guy's Harley with no helmet on, going, "Bye, Daddy, I love you." And I'll be like, "Stop," right? No helmet, nothing, right? Just doesn't have it. You got to know your kid. And again, this is going to be that hormonal response for the girls. Click. For the guys, the big players, testosterone. There are other ones, obviously, so it's much more complex. Testosterone levels are really high fetally. They drop around birth, and then around age 9, they spike 9 to 15 times. Okay, during puberty, those levels just skyrocket. Okay. Testosterone is linked to more intensity, aggression, right? Sexuality, those desires men have. Okay. In 6th grade, I remember some guy coming up to me. We actually looked it up on the internet. Some kid came up to me and said, "Did you know the average middle school boy thinks about sex like every 3 minutes?" And I remember thinking, it sounds about right to me. Yeah, I agree with that one. Now, average college guy, I think we researched, it's 19 times a day. It's about 19 times a day guys in college think about sex. It's not like every minute. But it's a pretty strong feeling, right? It's pretty intense. I had a varsity tennis coach from one of the prep schools here, was at the seminar, and he said, my biggest challenge with these guys in the tennis match is when somebody serves to them, what do they want to do? just crunch that serve, right? And send it back over the net and get that point right away. Or when they're serving, they just want to get that ace every time. So the hardest thing is getting them to control that impulse to crush it and to set it up. He said, I tell them, we want 3 or 4 volleys. Then you can crush it. But you can't crush it every time the first time. But for that 17-year-old guy, what do they want to do? They just want to crush it. They just can't control that impulse. Now, contrary to popular TV commercials, the levels don't plummet when you get to like 60, okay? So I know they have the andro gel now, and guys my age can rub it on, and they're ready to play golf, and they're looking at the wife again, and they're driving around with their buddies in a Mustang. It doesn't drop off. If it does drop off, you've got a medical problem. It does slowly taper off. It's not an instantaneous plummet, okay? But that's the big player for the boys. Click. Yes.
Jumping to the defense of girls a little bit.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Men also have a testosterone cycle as well.
Yes.
Where they
Yes.
will get moody, they will get
Yes.
tired. What is the span for that? How often is that?
I don't know the actual span of that. I don't know that one. I'll ask my wife about that. So guys do go through phases. I'll say, honey, how often does it happen with me? Guys will go through phases when that testosterone is a little more fired up. Some of that does have to, they found in sports and stuff, when you're with the other guys and you're getting fired up, it really starts to crank up. But I don't know the answer to that. The book you might check out, and I have not read The Male Brain, but there's a book called The Female Brain, and I don't know the author. The one thing my wife said about it when she read it, she said, I never realized how controlled I was by my hormones all those years. She said, now I get it. At the time, I didn't understand it. Then, I guess the same lady wrote the Male Brain. It's a lot shorter. It's like 4 pages, But I'd be interested to see if it would be, that's the book I would check to see if there's some, I don't know if there's any rhythmicity to it or not, like a female. Is there really?
Much larger cycle than women's every 28 days.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's a fabulous question. That's the book that might have it. I'll have to jot that down too. So here's the face, right? If you show neutral faces to teenagers, if I showed you different slides of faces and there was one just neutral expression, you'd go, well, that person's really not feeling anything. When you show the same slide to teenagers, they say, oh, that guy's angry, right? Or that girl's angry. They're upset. They're constantly perceiving threats. Now, on a survival standpoint, does it make sense to have young men who are ready to perceive threats? That makes a lot of sense. Just read a story, I think it was in the Post the other day, Wall Street Journal, for elderly people. Can elderly people be victims of con men? And when they did the research on elderly people, they couldn't perceive threat as well. They would look at angry faces or manipulative faces and go, oh, what a nice young man, right? And then they lose all their money. So they're thinking part of the reason their targets very often, among other things, is they don't perceive it as well. Where the teenage guy is really perceiving hostility, right, all around. We'll go to the CU football game on Saturday. I'm going to the basketball game in the morning, then the football game in the afternoon. It's my son's 20th birthday. It's going to be a great day. Is there a good chance we'll see some drunk fraternity guys fighting? It happens every Saturday at the games, right? In the parking lots or whatever. Somebody's getting drunk, and you're looking at my girlfriend, and the next thing you know, they're fighting. Click. Okay, we're going to rack. Third part, the mirror system, okay? Comes from the term the mirror neuron systems. They're heavily loaded on the front side of your brain, the right side of your brain, kind of mid-level. They're the ones with axioms up to 3 feet long in the brain. They cut across the 2 hemispheres through something called the corpus callosum. It's like this little highway between the 2 hemispheres of your brain. And it collects all this information, and it puts together in like this sort of stained glass window of what others feel, what are they thinking, how should I behave. So we'll just do a couple quick practices. First of all, give me an inviting look. Make an inviting face to me. You immediately smiled and your eyes lit up. Okay, now bully me with your eyes. Bully me with your face. Okay? Can you do that pretty easy in the high school and the middle school, right? The looks, the girls especially, are masters at the looks. And when you catch them, they immediately say, oh no, I was looking out the window. They're so hard to catch. With guys, they hit somebody. You're like, you're going to the office, right? The girls, they do those looks. Now, click on the next one, and I'll show you the eye test. So the actual test on this, there's about 400 of these slides. You look at the eyes, and you have to decide what's that person feeling. So we'll do a couple quick on A, apologetic, friendly, uneasy, or dispirited. You want to guess? Uneasy, okay? B, top right, playful, comforting, irritated, or bored. Playful, right? C, over here, middle on the left, joking, flustered, desire, convinced. Desire. I had a teenage guy at my lecture at Denver Academy last week. He's a junior there, and he got it. And I'm like, way to go, man. You need that one. That's a good look. You need to know that look. D, cautious, insisting, bored, or aghast. It's cautious. I just blanked on it, but cautious was the answer on that one. E, despondent, relieved, shy, or excited. Despondent. F, annoyed, hostile, horrified, or preoccupied. This is a tough one. You get annoyed, it's annoyed. A lot of people get preoccupied too, because I think that looks similar. So your nonverbal processing, click, is how well your brain, this right side of your brain, can collect little things like where the eyes are, wrinkles in the face, or the smile, or the tone of a room, right? When politicians come into a room of strangers, good politicians can read people. They know who they should talk to, who they should schmooze with, how to make friends, how to greet people. They generally have pretty good nonverbal processing skills. So that's what you call it. The mirror neurons help us do nonverbal processing. Now I want you to imagine you're going into a classroom and it's open seating. So if the science lab, let's say there's tables with two kids, two chairs at each table. You come into the door, the teacher says, okay, everybody take a seat. Your brain has about 2 seconds to think about what. What do you think about to pick your seat? Think about it. If you're a middle schooler, what should you look for? Friend, that's a good one. What else? Enemy, should you be aware of the enemies? Should you be aware of the kids that like to cause trouble, right? Maybe like to pull pranks on you, right? If you didn't do your homework, should you sit? Where do they think you should? The back, you try to hide, right? If you're trying to brown nose the teacher, where do you sit? Up front, right? There's and you got to think about who's friends with who based on past. So if you two are always sitting together, every class, and let's say you're late, and I come in, and the seat's open, and I sit next to you, what look are you going to give me? You're going to be like, and if you're a middle schooler, you're going to be like, loser. What are you doing, loser? And I'm like, well, I don't know. I just sat down. It was an open seat, okay? So the kids' brains have about 2 seconds to do that. The social butterflies of the world. And on that eye test, if you give it to women, the average female scores about 80th percentile on that eye test. These are the social butterflies of the world. They can go into any room, they can meet people. Guys, there's guys down on this end too. They can tell what people are feeling, how to behave, how to act, to engage others and make friends, okay? The average guy on the eye test is about the 50th percentile, okay? Jeff Foxworthy, the comedian, said, when it comes to social processing, women have an 8-lane superhighway and men have a 2-lane country road. He's actually right. So the corpus callosum, this middle area that connects the hemisphere where those axioms go through, it's about twice the size in females. It's also powered by estrogen. So the more estrogen you have, the more you think about all these different things. You collect much more information. And you're thinking about all the social things and the emotions, okay? Now, guys do have about 20% estrogen. So the average guy has about 20% estrogen in him. They found that if you have 21%, if you have just a little bit more estrogen, you're like the Alan Alda. You remember him? Who would be a contemporary actor? The sensitive guys, right? He was the sensitive male, right? The new term for those guys are 21s. You call them they're 21s because they have an extra percentage of estrogen. They do this. So those guys are more down here, okay? Some of your average engineering guys, where are they? Oh, baby, we're kind of sliding down, okay? Now, if you get down to this level here, 3rd, 4th, 5th percentile, you're into what's called nonverbal learning disability and the autism spectrum disorders. The new term is ASD, autism spectrum disorder. That includes Asperger's syndrome, so they've lumped Asperger's into that label. You all heard of Asperger's. It's gotten a lot of attention, okay? These are kids that really aren't reading the nonverbal, okay? So they can do great in math and science, and they can tell you every fact about some video game, okay? But they kind of miss out on the fact that nobody's really listening to those facts. They're kind of bored, right? Should you notice that? Yes? I have not heard of estrogen. I'm thinking they have been doing recently, and I'm blanking on the name of the chemical. It's connected to bonding. The levels go up, actually, when you have an orgasm, the levels go up. With oxytocin. So they've done some oxytocin treatment, and they found that oxytocin can improve social processing. Now, they're not marketing that for that. I haven't heard anybody using it, but there's been some research on oxytocin. Because oxytocin is related to bonding, connecting with others, okay? It's the reason when females after sex often want to cuddle, because their oxytocin level shot up, okay? The average guy, we do have some, not as much as women. So you're kind of like, well, I'm ready to watch the football game, right? And then your wife wants to cuddle. So they have found oxytocin. I think there's probably could be some promise in that. Now, I don't want to make a generality, but given the nature of the school, the name of the school, is it possible you might attract more students who are more the science guys, right? And some of the science girls, right? Who maybe aren't into that whole social thing, being the social butterfly. Obviously, you're going to have a lot of social butterflies here too, but you may have a few of those kids that are more into that science mind and not doing the social thing as well, okay? So you really got to think about your teenager. The teen years, the things that really crank up with this system, sarcasm. How many of your teenagers are sarcastic? Oh, baby. The sex jokes, right? So the 5th grade, my son, the first time he told a sex joke or heard one, it was like 5th grade, all through middle school. What are the guys joking about constantly? Sex jokes, right? The double meaning of words. I once mistakenly in the middle school said something about, oh, they were doing it, meaning like something in history or something. And some kid's like, he said doing it, you know, and they're all laughing. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't say anything anymore. I found out not too long ago when I was talking about chronic mental health problems, and the 8th graders like, chronic, man. And I'm like, what does that mean now? It's the term for dope heads. If you're a doper, you're chronic. They call that chronic. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't say anything anymore without having some new meaning. So this stuff, and it really speeds up, again, as estrogen levels go up, the hormone levels go up, it really gets going. It really cranks out. Now, just in general, and then we'll move on. If the moms here at the school, we're going to be planning the party for the middle school students or the high school students, how many meetings are they going to have? Oh, like 10, right? And they're going to figure out everybody's snack preferences and who's gluten intolerant and nut-free. We'll have the nut-free table of snacks, right? They have decorations everywhere. If the dads planned it, how many would they have? Meetings. Like 1. They'd be like, hey, you got a membership to Costco, right? Cool. I think they got those Oreos over there in those chip boxes. You get like 50, you know? And juice boxes. Get some juice boxes. I'll bring crepe paper. There's your dance, okay? It's not nearly as elaborate as what women are going to think about, and all the glass are going to piece together. Now, evolutionary-wise, when people looked at, well, why is that? If you think about women's traditional roles in ancient times, who were they taking care of that couldn't speak for themselves? Infant, the sick, the elderly, right? They had to read the nonverbal, right? The baby can't tell you what's going on. You had to read it and feel what they're feeling. So when you look at it from that perspective, they're like, well, yeah, women, that they needed to be able to do that. Guys didn't necessarily, that wasn't their role. And women do it much more effectively. Click. Okay, there's selecting the right seat. Click again. Here's our student walking to the cafeteria. We'll just do it quick. He could maybe join these 2 girls who are gossiping or talking. I don't know if they're gossiping or not. Heaven forbid they're gossiping. These 2 guys horsing around. There's a couple guys that are reading. Here's the boyfriend and girlfriend. Non-verbally, what's the safest spot for the kid? What would you guess? Not knowing anything about the kid, where do you think would be the safest? It's a boy. These 2 guys up here, you know, they're just reading. They're not really anything. If you sit with these guys, what could happen? If you don't know them, what could happen? You're the victim of the prank, right? They pull the prank on you. If these girls are gossiping, you sit by them, you're going to get the loser, right? And you probably don't want to interfere with the boyfriend and girlfriend, right? I think there's like a zone around those two that you stay away from. Click. Okay, so that's our social processing. You got to think about where's your kid on that spectrum. We do groups at our office. I've been doing them for 33 years. It's to help kids move up in their social processing, learn how to read others, how to effectively interact with each other. My group brochure is in there. That's basically what we're doing. So we're trying to help the kids move down the line. The concept of mean girls, not that you would have any here, but if you did have a mean girl, the easiest way to think of a mean girl is way down here. She can read everything about the other girls. And what does she do with that information? Opportunities for embarrassment, for power and control, right? They're using it for their purposes to have power. What do nice girls do? They read others. They realize you're being excluded, that no one's befriended you, and what do? They include you in, right? They're always working to build community and harmony. Those are the girls we want. Great film my kid and I saw it when he was about 10. I just love it. The Princess Diaries. Anne Hathaway, incredible film. She goes from being down here, the girl that nobody notices, some kid sits on her, right, at the start of the film, to, with the help of Julie Andrews. Now, Julie Andrews could help anyone. She ends up here. The difference between her, and there's this great scene with her and the mean girl cheerleader and the ice cream cone or whatever, and she basically says, you know, you're always going to be mean. But I'm fluid now too. I've got social skills, and I'm going to use them to help the children of Morovia or something, right? She wants to do good things with it. She's not looking to torture other kids. Okay? So sometimes the bully kids, they have phenomenal nonverbal processing. They're very good at it, and they use it to have control. Click. Okay, this is the autism spectrum disorder. If you look at the activity across this way in the brain, this would be your non-ASD kid, lots of light. See the color of the light? It's all working. This would be that area across the brain for the kid with autism spectrum disorder. It's just a lot less developed. So the latest science is looking at the neurons aren't as developed, they're not as long, they're not as robust, they're just not picking up on stuff. So they're often making the social mistakes because they're not noticing things about others. Okay, click. Now we'll put it all together, teen angst. The term angst, if anybody ever asked you, anybody know who wrote the term angst, who developed it? It's a philosopher named Soren Kierkegaard came up with angst. And it's this idea of all those emotions of that teenager swirling around. And there's the teen in the middle of it all, right? These emotions and the friendships and the nonverbal, and they're getting busted in school because they can't pay attention, and you're yelling at them about their homework, and they're just spinning around. Like Aristotle's quote, adolescents today are as fickle in their desires as they are vehement in expressing them. That means they change their mind a lot and they're really intense about it, right? Now, what they notoriously do is they'll do things to relieve their angst that makes them feel in control again, but tends to end up with more angst later, okay? So if I cyberbully somebody, and I'm in my room all by myself, and I'm not feeling so great about myself, I'm kind of down, I had a tough day, and I send a text or an email to some other kid, and it's anonymous. How do I feel? Yeah, I'm roasting that kid. He's such a dork, right? Now later, when the police show up at my door, and there's been plenty of cases of that in the newspaper, the police showing up at the kid's door for bullying or whatever, some kid suicided. How do I feel then? Am I in control anymore? Every guy who's ever stepped on the gas pedal of a car, when you step on it to race, how do you feel? Power. When you run into a pole, how do you feel? Not so great, right? I did lose one of my patients, Brandon Mayo. It was right before Columbine, and that covered his. He just won the state high school wrestling tournament. He had ADHD, was off his meds. Went out with another guy, not too far from here on Iliff. Raced his car against another kid, went off the road, and he died. He hit a bridge embankment. Him and his buddy in the front seat, no seatbelts on, they both died. So they do things to give them a sense of control, and it works, right? But later, they're pretty out of control. Okay, it just adds more. What you're hoping for is what Friedrich Nietzsche said, the philosopher Nietzsche said, out of chaos comes a shooting star. Okay? That's what you're hoping, is to get your teenager to direct that energy into something brilliant, right? And help them move down that line and direct it. Click. Okay, you can read all these. We don't have much time left, but guidelines for development, know who your kid is. That's what we've been talking about. Second is you do have to embrace their need for control. Every middle school parent learns pretty quick, does your middle schooler want to have more control? Can you treat a middle schooler like you do the little 4 and 5-year-old? No, you don't micromanage the middle schooler from then on out. You don't micromanage your teenager. They really don't like it. They want to feel they're in control, okay? One morning, my son, I said something about, did you get your chores done? He was like 5th grade. And I heard him say, stop telling me what to do. And the old German part of me was ready to respond, right? Unfortunately, I bit my tongue while reading the paper and I said, excuse me? And he said, I want to be able to do my chores on my own without being told. I'm like, okay, ka-ching, baby. That's what you want, right? You want your kid to do the things on their own, right? Do you want him to do it because you tell him to do it? He wanted to have control. And I'm thankful I bit my tongue and didn't respond too much. And I'm like, cool. So we came up with a plan that day, which is he had till 8 o'clock to do his chores. If he didn't, then I got to say something, right? And he didn't get paid. If he did it before at 8 on his own, he got paid. If he didn't, I was in his face. He didn't get paid. And he agreed to that. It worked great, okay? He was taking responsibility. Structure, you got to slow him down. I like the Jell-O bowl analogy. You know, the old days when you made Jell-O, the old-fashioned way, mixing it up with water in it, and you put it in a bowl in the fridge, right? Some of your kids are like the Jell-O King Supers. They're already cubed. They were born with into cubes. They have incredible structure. They have good self-control. They think about others' feelings. They don't get too upset. Do those kids need a lot of structure? Not really. There's other kids you got, they need a big bowl. And if it has any cracks in it, that Jell-O's going to leak out. So the number one cause, if you didn't look at neurology, if you just said, what's the one thing parents could do to cause their kids to have problems? Anyone want to guess what it is? Parental inconsistency. So if one day you say, hey man, if you cross this line, here's what's going to happen. But then the next 3 days, you don't reinforce that rule anymore. And then you try to reinforce it the next day. Your inconsistency is going to drive that kid further and further out of the bowl. You need to be very consistent with your teenagers. I would tell all of you, have a ladder for what their freedoms are, their responsibilities, and what the expectations are for them. When they get to, you know, anything, pierce their ears, wear jewelry, makeup, all this stuff, and then when they get their cell phones, their iPad, driving obviously has a connection. You're laying it all out, what their curfew is going to be every year. You should lay it out ahead of time so they know exactly where they're going to be and where they're going to fall back down to if they don't follow the rules. So if they don't follow the rules, here's what's happening. If you don't use your president, here's what's happening. You will be grounded, you'll be losing that cell phone. Limits on the electronic stuff. How many of you keep the chargers in your room or have the modem in your room where you can turn it off? That's some kids really need that. If you don't, what are they doing at 3 in the morning? They're on the gaming and all this stuff, right? Or they're texting constantly. Keep the charger in your room, right? Collect the phones at night. There's no reason. The one thing that really, when you think about teen angst, when I was a teenager, and let's say there was some bullying going on, and I'm feeling pretty angstful stuff about school. When I went home, did I have to deal with it? No, it was back at school. I could sit in my room, I could put on the Moody Blues and read a novel, right? Fall asleep, maybe look at the Playboy under my bed, and I could forget about the angst, right? Now, if the kid's phone's in there, can they ever get a break from it? They don't get a break from all that angst. They need a break. They need a place like where home is a sanctuary, where you can count on just relaxing. Now, because of their need to be with their friends and be connected, when you tell them you're going to take the phone away and stuff, how do they react? No, I have to be in touch. You know, I'm going to miss something, right? But what you're saying is, you'll be just fine. You'll be better off without it than being plugged in 24/7. Come from the teens' needs base. They want to have friends. They want to be independent. They want to be responsible. You need to approach them from that perspective. If you got the junior high guy and he's doing some irritating behavior and you say, would you stop that? You're driving your sister crazy. What's he thinking? Yeah, right? I had a 6th grader that I'm seeing right now. He's in our group. And I asked him at the meeting when I met him, I said, how come you want to come to my group? He looked at me and he said, I haven't been invited to a birthday party in 2 years. I really want to get invited to a birthday party. Like, cool, man, I'm going to help you do that. Christy was with me last Wednesday when we were playing hockey. I got a gym we can use. We're playing the stick hockey. Our team scored a goal. That same kid threw down his stick, stormed off, right? Later on we were talking about it. Just looked and I go, you know, things like this happen at birthday parties. If you react like that, you're probably not going to get invited back. So if you want to be going to birthday parties, you may need to change that behavior, okay? I'm coming from his needs base. He wants to have the friends, right? So I'm appealing to him. I'm sales. It's all about sales. Social and emotional goals, positive messages for success. After age 6, positive messages need to be earned. Okay, you can still give the warm fuzzies, I love you, you're so special. Kids need to earn them. If you give your kid too much positives for unearned stuff, they know it's fake. And it does not build their self-esteem at all. There's some research to show it actually makes it worse. So earn self-esteem. Build inside half double rule. I'll give you a quick one. If your kid messes up, you're going to have the consequences for him, right? And you sit down and have the consequence. If the kid apologizes and talks to you, maybe later after they're calmed down, and they can talk to you about why they were doing what they did, how it made others feel, what they should have done instead, the consequence is cut in half, okay? If they don't, it's double. So we went from a 2-day grounding, we could go to 1 day, or we could go to 4. It's up to you. So you're really pushing a kid to take responsibility and understand why it is what they did, okay? So that's just a good parenting strategy. Always talk about risk with your kids. Well, I told the 8th graders today, we're talking about this lovely teenage girl about 5 years ago out in Westminster, was at a party. She was 18, standing in the front of the window with her girlfriends, hadn't been drinking or drugging. Some crashers came, some kid pulled a pistol out, pulled it, hit her in the head, killed her instantly. They've never solved the crime. I actually met the girl's aunt at a lecture about 2 years ago. But I tell that story to the kids, and then we talk about what's the risk factors they should have thought about. There are drugs and alcohol, 100 kids in the house, no adults, party crashers coming, and it's after midnight. You want to talk to your kids about the risk stuff now when they're calm. What I said to the kids today, I said, look, I know that when you're at a party and you're having fun, the last thing you're going to want to really think about is, what's the risk right now? You're just having fun. But maybe if you think about it now, maybe just one little light bulb will go off in your head, okay? So, I also tell the kids, look, you get an STD that's incurable, the rest of your life, guess what you're going to have to tell every partner? Oh, by the way, I have an STD. Do you really want to do that? Is that something you really want to have to do, right? The story of Laura Bush I told a couple years ago, she had a book, came out a couple years ago, The President's Wife. When she was a teenage girl, she was talking in the car while she was driving to her friend, went through a 4-way stop down in Texas, broadside a kid, killed one of her classmates, killed the kid. It was her fault. She got the ticket. And she wrote about how she struggled with that her whole life, knowing that she killed a kid because she was chit-chatting, okay? Connecting emotionally, do stuff with your kids. The one thing that will keep you together, I have a website called adventuredad.org. You can go to the website. There's all sorts of adventures to do with your kids. My son and I got off Mount Rainier back in June. We went and summited Mount Rainier. He made it. I got 1,000 feet from the top and cramped up and I was done, but he made it. It was totally cool. Do adventures with your kids. Get them outside. It's the one time you can get away with your kid. And no cell phones, no electronics. If you need to, take them out to Utah and go rafting. You can't tell, there's no cell phone service, right? Get away with them. Do some high-intensity stuff. Your boys like high-intensity stuff. Middle school guys, you can take them up to Allenzer Racing, right? They're totally into that stuff. You go out to the Vandermeer Raceway. Play laser tag or whatever. If you want to, go take them and play paintball. They're intense. They love that kind of stuff. Have adventures with your kid. Rituals are the things you do over and over in your family. You should have some consistent rituals in your family. In my family, every Sunday night, we watched Bonanza. Most of you aren't old enough to remember that, but we watched Bonanza. We had grilled cheese and tomato soup, and we played cards, right? Uno, and then we evolved to other hearts and spades. Played cards every Sunday. Didn't matter that the 60s were going on, that my brother was a raving hippie. We were going to play cards Sunday night. We all did that. Kids need that. Teenagers need that. Next. Lots of emotional sharing time. The car is a great place to talk with your teenager. You don't have to look at them. They don't like you looking at them, right? Just talk in the car. I like the analogy when you're talking to a teenager, it's like fly fishing. If you've ever fly fished, you just throw it out there and you wait. And you pull it back and you try something else, right? Bait fishing is like saying, How was your day? And then you get the F word. Fine. You've learned nothing about your teenager, right? So you're going to wait, you're in the car. Don't ask them always about homework first, okay? That's a buzzkill for the kids. Wait a second. Don't leave if you're picking them up. Don't leave till you know they have their homework, right? But throw something in there about the Avalanche or the Nuggets. And then you're just driving along, and maybe you talk to one of your friends at the school, and you heard about some teacher who was on a warpath with the students in science lab or whatever, and you're just going, oh, that's Mr. Johnson, science lab, right? You know, you're just kind of throwing it out, seeing what comes out. If they do say something provocative, don't overreact, right? So if all of a sudden they talk about someone's having sex or whatever, just grip the steering wheel and go, oh, that's nice, dear. Don't overreact, okay? Sometimes they look for overreactions from you. You want to help them kind of understand the bigger picture in life, you know, that everything works out in the wash. And, you know, with kids, I use a lot of animal analogies. We talk about top dogs and how some kids want to be the top dogs. Or some kids want to be baseball players. They want to throw the ball hard socially. Other kids just want to play softball. They're not really looking to be the top of the pecking order. They just want to have friends, right? Most kids, 65% of kids, just want to have friends. They're not looking to be popular. They just want to be nice, right, and have friends. Biting your tongue, well, promoting independence, your first response to some of these things should always be, oh, what's your solution? What's your idea? You missed 3 assignments, I checked the power school, you check the power school. Always push your kid to be as independent as possible academically. So do you have the power school thing, the electronic school here? Yeah. Infinite Campus or whatever? Yeah. How many of you are checking that every week? How many of your kids are checking it every night? Good for you. You should stop checking it. When my son graduated from Arapahoe High School, he was like number 10 in the class. My proudest feeling was that in 4 years, I never looked at their Infinite Campus. Never needed to. And I told him right up front, I don't want to look at it. If I need to, because you're not proving it to me, I will. But I don't want to. And I never had in 4 years, never had to look at that thing. If anybody's going to look at it, it should be your kid. Okay? You're pushing independence. How are they going to solve the problem? Bite your tongue a lot. Good sign of a parent is the teeth mark in their tongue. Don't get too involved in the stuff. Don't be the parent who's always rushing off to the school and busting into the middle school classroom to talk to the teacher about how your child's being bullied or whatever, okay? Drive it through your kid first, right? So you don't get involved unless you have to. Now, Michael Thompson said, hey, if your kid is, all kids have social struggles. If they're struggling, don't get involved. If your kid's having severe problems, get involved. Now, what's the magic question? How do you know, right? Ask other parents. You call me up. I had a middle school principal call me the other day, and she said, I just want to run a situation by you to see if you think this is normal. Now, I would tell all of you have a really broad definition of normal. There's barely anything I ever hear that I say, that's not normal. In this one case, about 3 weeks ago, I said, that is not normal. That child needs to be in therapy immediately, and you need to call that parent and get that kid into treatment. That is not normal. That is serious bullying behavior, and that kid's going to be a menace to everyone. I don't rarely hear that. Most stuff is pretty normal. And when your kids are older, they're going to tell stories to you, and you're going to go, I'm so glad I didn't know that when you were a teenager. Thanks, thanks for not telling me then, right? And you did the same thing with your parents. We're just about done. Promote, limit electronics, care feeding the frontal lobe, best 4 things you do for your kids: plenty of water, sleep, exercise, and good nutrition. Start the day with some protein, some whole grain oatmeals. Those are going to last the longest. Okay, exercise is going to bump up dopamine levels. It's going to get more oxygen up to your brain to clean out the electrons that are floating around in there. It's going to bring glucose. How many of you can remember in high school at like the 1 o'clock class after lunch just falling asleep? Remember that? I can remember a history class just dead, right? They need to move. They need activity and move. First thing I saw when you came to your school was the kids in the gym. Like, yeah, they need that. They need to be moving around. Click these next ones you can look at on your own. Importance of sleep. Sleep schedules are different for teenagers. The most important thing, whether or not they're going to bed at this time or this time, is consistency. The worst thing you can do is has a variable sleep pattern. So if that kid likes to go to bed at 11 o'clock, that's just fine. Keep it that way all the time. Now, on the weekends, they do catch up a lot. They will sleep all Sunday. Someone will do that, and they need the sleep. Exercise. Last thing I want to talk about is stress. Stress can be very motivating for the right kid. Neurologically, it tends to be more for boys are motivated by stress academically than girls. For boys, stress can increase decision-making and risk-taking. good risk-taking and decision-making. And girls, they found actually is the opposite. Girls question their decisions more if they're feeling too much stress and competition. Next one, quick. If there's too much stress, your president's offline, and you get much more emotional. So you really got to watch it. You've got high-performing kids, right? They're here. So they're going to be naturally driven and stressed, okay? You want to make sure your kid's got a break from it all, and you're helping them manage the stress, and you're having family time. You watch a TV show with your kid every week or a couple nights a week. You play air hockey with them or something. You got to teach them how to relax and take a deep breath, okay? Not every day, every second of every day is going to determine whether they get into Stanford, okay? It doesn't work that way, right? Managing their stress. They might get to Stanford, but if they can't manage their stress, they're probably coming home. They're not going to make it. You need to be able to manage that stress. There's the 40 asset handout that's with the packet. One of the handouts, click, is, well, that's just the last slide. There's a thing called the 40 assets out of the University of Minnesota. Great research on what your kids should have internally and externally. I'd encourage all of you to read it, give you some nice guidelines about extracurricular activities, work, all sorts of things. There's handouts from my practice, the video brochure and stuff. Thank you very much. I know we went over and you got to run. I'll hang out for a little bit if anyone wants to talk, but thank you for coming. It was fabulous to be here. Thank you.